What a doula can do is, even though we're out of control when it comes to what's going to happen, right? What we can be controlling is how we respond.
Today's episode is about support. And no conversation about support for family building is complete without including pregnancy and postpartum support. And more to the point, doula services. Today, we're going to dive deep into the role of the doula, and we're going to do it with a real expert.
Hi, everyone. I'm Latham Thomas, founder of Mama Glow and the Mama Glow Foundation.
Mama Glow is a global maternal health and education platform that educates birth workers and nurse care managers to support people along the childbearing continuum. And today's guest, Latham's journey with birth workers began over 20 years ago when she gave birth to her son.
I was able to work with midwives for the birth, and the pregnancy process was really smooth. We were at a place called Elizabeth Seton Childbearing Center in New York City, and it was the only freestanding birth center in New York. And so you could work with midwives there. They would attend the pregnancy, the birth, and then because they want you to get home as early as possible, my son was born at like 1:09 p.m. and I went home at like 6 p.m. that night, which was really cool, actually. And it allowed us to also have a lot of autonomy in the process. And I really recommend for people when they're, exploring their journeys and pathways to parenthood to really explore what options work best for them when they think about how they want to actually deliver. Do you want to be in a hospital? Is that where you feel most safe? Do you want to be in more of a home birth setting, where you can have like a lot of autonomy and sovereignty over the process? Or maybe sort of something that feels like in between, which is a birth center that has clinical options available to you.
Latham just mentioned midwifery, and previously we've been talking about doulas. The distinction between the two is actually quite large, although many people get confused. First, let's define the role of a midwife.
The role of a midwife is that of a clinician. So they're providing the clinical support, they're doing all of your prenatal care. Even if you were to see a midwife along the entire reproductive life course, which you can, like you would for your GYN care, that person who's tending to you during the pregnancy can do everything up to delivery and postpartum care visits as well. The only thing that they don't do is surgical delivery, right? And so that is for high stakes technicians like obstetricians, obviously.
So where a midwife is a clinician, a doula is a support system and a navigator.
A doula is a non-clinical care support that provides emotional support, physical support, education, partner support, advocacy tools, and really helps you to navigate this most powerful and yet vulnerable time in your life. They are like having a cheerleader. They're like having a producer for your birth, as one of my clients calls it, but really a person who's there to ensure that you're educated in the process and also can navigate options and develop that self-trust that's really necessary to give birth in a way that is most optimal.
There's a lot of different ways that doulas can offer support.
It is really like the empowerment, right, that you feel when you're undergoing this process. It's having that kind of companion person who you can depend on, who believes in you, and who can also support you in navigating your needs, right? It's a person who's anticipating your needs. And doulas are really wonderful as we look at the healthcare system because they work really well to help facilitate optimal communication between care providers and their clients or patients. They are there to also ensure that everyone involved is on the same page in terms of information flow. They're really good at helping to demystify a lot of the information that comes your way from the doctor, to spend time with you, to help answer your questions, and also help you come up with a game plan for what the process can be like. They'll help you develop what's called a birth plan. We like to call it birth preferences because, when you think about like making plans, like plans never go like, as you would expect, but a birth preferences sort of document can help you to think about like, well, if I were to be presented with a cesarean section, even though my preference is to have a vaginal delivery, what would I like in case of that, option, right? If aftercare, what would I, want for rooming in? Do I want my baby in the room or in the nursery? What are my plans for infant feeding? What are my plans for recovery? And so really mapping that process, asking the questions that are relevant, and then thinking through your answers so that when it comes time to make a decision, you're not confronted with information for the first time and having to make a choice under pressure, but really feeling empowered to make those choices because the doula is there to set you up to succeed, right? We cannot control the birth outcome, right? Nobody can predict the birth outcome, but what we can do is ensure that you're best prepared for all options, for all outcomes.
All of this is important right on the surface. But when you dig deeper into the true picture of maternal health in this country, the role of the doula begins to reveal itself as critical.
I think that's really critical as we think about the times that we're navigating, where, we have birth disparities in the United States that impact disproportionately African American women and birthing people. And so when we think about their needs more specifically, then we're understanding that we have to look at this through the lens of care for the most marginalized communities. And so there's deep listening involved, there's advocating involved, there's really understanding some of the unique barriers to care. And so doulas are really wonderful in being able to surface those needs, tend to those needs, and also enlist the care team, what I like to call the birth village, in providing adequate support.
Doulas can help remove a lot of the stress that is associated with childbirth. And stress is nothing that should be overlooked. There's a scientific and biological reason that stress can really interfere.
For us to be able to birth, we have to feel safe. And so I try to explain this to people through the lens of us being primates, right? Our evolution is really, we're like old and we have this ancient technology that like operates us, like his ancient operating system, for instance, right? But we live in these modern times. And so stress, right, as a protective factor in many cases is there to ensure that that we don't get eaten by a lion, right? And so if we think about birth through this lens, if you think of say there's like an ape and they're tucked away and they're, moving through the throes of labor, and then they perceive, a predator out of the blue, right? Everything stops, right? Labor halts. All the blood sugar, blood flow, oxygen, everything moves to the outer limbs, right? The core, obviously, the heart is pumping really fast, and then all of the energy goes to your limbs to get you to safety, right? So all of that energy that was focused on and all that cardiac output that was focused on really just helping you support the labor process moves towards getting you to safety, right? And that doesn't matter if we're being chased by a lion or being chased by a deadline to like have your baby by a certain time. Or if you don't progress by this time, we're going to introduce Pitocin, or, right? So these kinds of things, your body can't tell the difference, right? And so the stress response is the same as if I was being chased by an animal. And so what's really important for doulas to do is keep people out of that head frame that it's not safe here, right? So we want to move people to a place of safety. And that's really challenging in an environment that's not your home.
The support that doulas offer is hands-on and personal, so it's very important to find a doula who's a good fit for you.
When we're thinking about hiring a doula and we want to make sure that we find the right person for our family, it really comes down to trusting your instincts about their energy, right? So much of what you'll be encountered with are people who are sharing their backgrounds, their stories, their histories, their accolades, and all of that stuff is really important. But it really comes down to how does that person make you feel, right? If that person makes you feel amazing, if you get off the phone or out of the meeting and you're like floating and there's just this connection, if it felt like you were talking to your best friend, those are the kinds of people that you want to hire, right? Because it's such an intimate time. And it is one of the most intimate moments that you'll be inviting a stranger into, right, in your life. And so I always think that, it's important to interview a few people. So, a couple ways you can go about it. Number one is by recommendation, right? So you can talk to people, and one way you can do it is on a group chat with a couple folks that you're friends with. Hey, I want to hear about your experience with your doulas. Can you share anything about them? Can I also get contact information so I can speak to them, right? That's one pathway. A second pathway is going the agency route. So trying a reputable organization. Mama Glow, for instance, provides doula matching services, including for private pay clients, for insurance, as well as for pro bono clients on the Mama Glow Foundation side, right? So you can get matched with somebody who meets your preferences that way, and then you just put it in the hands of the experts, and they look at what your needs are, and then they help you match that way. And then another way is through working in nurse family partnership, or working with your own doctor or your own midwife and talking to them and saying, are there people that you work with more specifically? And typically, a doctor might have a doula that they work with more frequently, or a midwife might have a cadre of doulas that they work with more frequently. And actually, my sister, who's also a doula, who did our program, she works with her midwife who delivered her. And so it's oftentimes that you'll find those types of connections, and it's really easy because then you ask that person, they refer you someone, and typically there's a match. But I would say it's really worth doing the research and meeting a few people, and then you're feeling it out, right? In terms of the energy. Oh, I really love this about this person. I really love that. But ultimately, this person made me feel amazing, right? And that's what you want to go off of, because pretty much most people are going to have a lot of shared knowledge that across the board will apply to your circumstances. There may be unique things like language or cultural preferences. And so you might meet someone who's like, hey, I'm from this environment, and this is my second language, or this is my first language. And so I'd love someone who could speak that, or, someone who comes from this specific background who also maybe have culinary abilities, who can help me maybe with some food, or, if someone's far away from home, they might also depend on their doula to kind of bridge that cultural and familial gap.
So that's the kind of connection and person that you want. And Latham has some tips for how to figure out if that person that you're interested in fits the bill.
I really encourage doing a meeting that's like digital, where you can see someone's face, right? So a FaceTime, Zoom or what have you are really great ways to meet people. When you're in the meeting, you want to have a couple questions prepared so that you can lead the conversation in the direction you'd like to go, but then also make space for them to share things about themselves that you would like to know. Typically, a doula is going to let you know things, leave that conversation knowing something really important about them and their work, but you want to be asking about where they got educated, where they learned to practice, how long they've been in practice. Typically, how many clients do they take at a time? What does their care package look like? Typically, a doula will have a standard sort of package of services, and that might look like anything from 3 prenatal visits, coverage at your birth, and, labor support leading up to your birth, early postpartum support, and then like maybe 3 postnatal visits that might be in their birth doula package. If you were getting a postpartum doula, they would talk about starting with you on either a day or nighttime basis, and a clip of a minimum of 3 to 5 hours, but like max like 8 to 10 hours at a time. And those would be like an hourly package of bookings. And you could do that over the course of a couple of days, weeks, or months, right? And so those are 2 separate pathways. Birth is one pathway, postpartum is another, but sometimes people will do both. You'll have a client who will be with you during the birth, and you'll do postnatal support as well over an extended period of time. Or those can be 2 people. It really depends. And sometimes those are teams of doulas, right? So you want to find out, do you work with a doula team? Is there a partner? What happens if you're sick? right? What happens if I go into deliver and you're not available, right? What's the backup plan? Is there a backup doula? How do you work within the healthcare system? What hospitals have you worked with most frequently? Do you work with midwifery teams? Like all kinds of things we can ask, right? But the main things are just to understand the type of experiences that they've had and how varied those experiences are, because you want someone who's had, a variety of experiences that will make them equipped to be able to serve you.
Yes, getting someone who's been a doula for a long time might be preferred. But when it comes to this kind of thing, experience comes in different forms.
There's people who are coming to this work who are coming with a whole bevy of life experiences that they bring, in addition to the fact that they just got trained as a doula. So sometimes we see people who come through our training program who are already nurses. We're in fact training cohorts of nurses constantly. We're training midwives right now as well. And what we find is that there's also people who have been at tons of births and they just finally are getting formal training. So you might get someone who has a ton of experience, but on paper, it doesn't look like they're well experienced, right? So that's one. The other thing is you'll have people who bring other incredible skills. So sometimes we have a licensed mental health provider, right, who takes the training. So they bring that set of skills to the work. Or a social worker who will do the doula training. They bring that set of skills to the work, right? Or you'll have someone who is in the healing arts. And so they bring massage and acupuncture and all these things. So really, you end up meeting people where you're like, oh, well, they don't have as many births, but look at all these other things that they also have. And so that makes it also sometimes a fit for you. And when you have people who have less experience with deliveries, typically, if you're on a scale in terms of finances, they would be lower on that scale in terms of pay. And so you could enter into this if you're paying out of pocket, paying someone on a lower scale.
So when looking for a doula, you're looking for that connection, and you're also looking for that experience. And for anyone out there who might want to become a doula, well, training new doulas is something that Mama Glow specializes in.
Mama Glow is a global maternal health and education platform that is committed to serving a global community of doulas and nurse care managers and training people who will be on the front lines to support clients along the reproductive life course, but more specifically, the childbearing continuum. We offer doula training programs and advanced skills trainings for people who are working in hospital settings, in home birth settings, as well as in birth centers. And we also design programs for companies like CVS Health, where we created a nurse care manager program and doula competency for CEU credits. And then we also train nurses in healthcare systems so that they can have doula skills and bring those into the labor and delivery floors. And so our goal really is to democratize doula support and services, and also ensure that people who are encountering and working with doulas can work with them in a capacity that is a complementary, right? And that also really meets the needs of the clients that we're supporting. And so it's all about centering folks who are most marginalized and making sure that we meet their needs, and ensuring that we also meet the needs of the doulas who are serving and bringing so much energy and time to supporting people who are at this powerful threshold in their lives.
There is one more part of this that we really wanted to make sure we addressed before wrapping it all up here. Doulas are kind of famous for providing support for labor and delivery, but there is a classification of doula you might not think about, and that's the postpartum doula. This is someone who can look after mom when mom is looking after baby.
Postpartum doulas are really magical, right? They're there to show up to help us through recovery. Whether you had a vaginal delivery or a belly birth, regardless, you're going to have some recovery time ahead, right? And so there's some discomfort that's common. Some people, it can be really painful, but typically it's just discomfort that can be addressed by some over-the-counter medication or really through like deep breathing exercises, warmth, really good food, some light movement. These things are also very helpful. And there's lots of things that postpartum doulas will have up their sleeve in terms of recovery tips and tools that they'll bring to support you. A lot of that includes body work. It'll include nutrition, so ensuring that there's food, whether they're preparing it or enlisting people to help prepare really good foods for you. I remember my postpartum days, like being at someone's house, being at the grocery store, cooking all this food, packaging all the food, putting it, like making that be a big thing for people because otherwise they weren't eating, right? And so making sure people have food, organizing a meal train. It is also logistical support of like visitors, right? Like organizing people who are coming in and out the home. It is, thinking through like safety, especially because after COVID, like, there's surges and people can be sick. And so it is thinking about like, what's our visiting plan look like? What does it look like for visitors to come? The doula can help with that. A doula can help also bring a family into they can help bring a family together, right? Because what happens many times too is that like maybe like you want your mom there, but like maybe it's, like the idea would be like it's too much. And so having a doula can help figure out like the doula can help you figure out how to best utilize the skills of your mom, right? Okay, my mom's really organized. She's a good cook and she's really nosy. Okay, great. I'm going to have her cooking. I'm going to have her like, putting together like, charts for you. I'm going to have her charting like the diaper changes and the feedings. I'm going to have her sending out the notifications to families since she's really into information, right? Like you figure out how to utilize the people who are close, right? It's also really about, though, helping people rest. And I know it sounds simple and it sounds so easy. It's the hardest thing to do, especially as we live at this accelerated pace. People do not slow down. I will see people deliver and the baby will be fresh out and they're already on social trying to do an announcement, or they're already back online trying to like check into work. I'm like, didn't you just have a baby like an hour ago? Like, why are you on your phone working? Like, they just can't, right? And so this idea that we don't give people time to rest, or the expectation is that life is back to normal, it is not. And so I really try to help people lean into, rest as recovery, but also as necessity.
Doulas can really make a huge impact and transform one of life's most important and challenging milestones. And over the past few years, access to doula care has been on the rise, as more and more employers offer doula care as a benefit to their employees.
It's so important that there are organizations thinking about this while, because we can't wait for the federal government to show up and like with these solutions, we do have to lean on industry. And I'm grateful because the only way and the only reason we've been able to advance doula access has really been through privately held companies, and then like new startups that are like really pushing industry and pushing policymakers and legislators to like hurry up and bring the solutions online. So we're so grateful for the work that you all do.
Latham mentioned the work that we do, and by we, she means Progyny, the force behind this podcast. Progyny offers pregnancy and postpartum benefits that employers can offer to their employees. If you're interested in learning how you can help bring this benefit to your place of work, we actually do have resources for you. You can learn more at progyny.com/talk-to-HR. I want to thank Latham for joining us today and for all of the great work that she's doing with Mama Glow. You can learn more about Mama Glow at mamaglow.com. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to connect with Progyny, you can do that at Progyny Inc. Of course, if you're listening on a podcast app, please leave a rating and review. Those really, really, really help. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. That's also very helpful. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progyny. Please remember, this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bulger, and this is Infertility.